Can I just interrupt you because you're talking generalities here? So through the report, theft of assets. Around 2/3 of these reports related to lost assets, with theft making up only 13%. Can you define lost assets? Question. I mean, look, this is serious stuff. So please don't talk generalities. What are you practically going to do to sort this out? But in the end, people have got to fear that when they break the law, when they're deceitful, when they steal, they go to prison.
Right, gather round, because today we've got something that is equal parts baffling, infuriating, and somehow deeply, profoundly British. Imagine you've hired a cleaner, you pay them a fortune, you come home one day and half your furniture is missing. You ask them where it went and they look you dead in the eye and say, "We have a comprehensive asset tracking framework with tiered accountability protocols." You'd lose your mind, wouldn't you? Well, that is essentially what happened in Parliament, except instead of your sofa, it's taxpayer money, and instead of one cleaner, it's an entire government department. Welcome, friends, to another glorious episode of How Is This Actually Happening? So, here's the scene. The Public Accounts Committee is in session. MPs are grilling senior civil servants about a rather alarming report on fraud within the Ministry of Defence. And then Rupert Lowe steps up to the microphone. Now, if you're not familiar with Rupert Lowe, he is not the sort of man who does gentle questioning. He's the sort of man who reads a report, goes very quiet, and then absolutely lets rip in the most composed, devastating way possible, like a very polished kettle that has quietly, thoroughly boiled over. Real quick before we roll the footage, if you're enjoying this content, do me a huge favor, hit that like button and smash subscribe. Over 98% of viewers watch without subscribing. Don't be one of them. It's free for you and it helps us out more than you know. Already clicked? You're awesome. Let's get into the video.
So, Rupert Lowe, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't quite know where to start. When I look at this report, I don't think this tells you all of the leakage that's taking place. If I was on the end of a report like this, I'd certainly not be complacent. So when I read, some areas of the MOD do not consider fraud to be a major risk and can be reluctant to engage. So I look at this, and I run lots of contracting business. We do lots of procurement. And I just don't think there's any joined-up thinking evident here at all. And you're going to be spending a lot more than you're currently spending. Your whatever it is, 46 billion, is likely to go up to 75 billion. So if these endemic sort of cultural and structural inefficiencies continue, there's going to be more leakage, and therefore more taxes are going to be required on the private sector. So I think this is really very concerning. And I'd like to know, Jeremy, really, how are you going to improve this, and are you going to give it the seriousness that it requires?
I said at the outset of this hearing, Mr. Lowe, that I take this seriously. There's absolutely no room for complacency. It's the heart of my job, the job of everyone on this panel, but the department as well, to make sure that we are maximising the value we get from every pound of taxpayers' spend. That requires the controls in place. It requires
Can I just interrupt you because you're talking generalities here? So through the report, theft of assets. Around 2/3 of these reports related to lost assets, with theft making up only 13%. Can you define lost assets? Question. Personnel and management issues and information exploitation. Failure to follow gifts and hospitality rules, abuse of flexible working time, and deceit and misrepresentation of financial advantage. Unlawfully obtaining and disclosing official documentation. I mean, look, this is serious stuff. So please don't talk generalities. What are you practically going to do to sort this out?
There is no disagreement.
These aren't generalities. These are actual events.
There is no disagreement between us on the seriousness and the importance of the issue. I will talk specifically about assets, and then I will talk about the wider strategy to deal with fraud, because there is actually a whole set of different issues that you are raising there. Control of assets is very important in a department like the Ministry.
So what is something lost? When you say lost assets, most of them are apparently lost. What does that mean? Does anyone get punished for losing an asset? In my business, if somebody loses an asset, if there's no justification for losing it, they have to pay for it.
We record and follow up all lost assets. The process is underpinned by our security control framework, where it happens.
You can have
to
as many
check
risk
security
registers,
concerns.
as many processes, as many sort of analytical tools. In the end, you've got to send people to prison for being dishonest. And that's what you would do. I know we've got issues with the courts who don't punish people properly. But in the end, people have got to fear that when they break the law, when they're deceitful, when they steal, they go to prison. Perhaps you should start by getting your counter-fraud and the police teams to actually trust and work together. And that's your cultural problem. If people don't work together, nothing happens. So look, I think, Jeffrey, I've done my bit for now.
Well, I'd just like to build on that. I'm going to just...
He starts by saying he doesn't even know where to begin, which honestly is a completely fair reaction when you're staring at a document that casually mentions things like theft, deceit, abuse of flexible working time, misrepresentation for financial advantage, and the unlawful disclosure of official documentation. That's not a fraud report, that's a crime anthology. And yet, apparently, some areas of the Ministry of Defence do not consider fraud to be a major risk. Let that sink in for a moment. A government department that is about to see its budget balloon from £46 billion to potentially £75 billion does not consider fraud a major risk. At that budget level, even a modest percentage of leakage is an eye-watering sum of money, the kind that makes ordinary people's eyes water when they see it disappear from public services they actually rely on. Rupert Lowe, drawing on his background running contracting and procurement businesses, makes the very sensible point that there is no joined-up thinking evident in any of this, and he is not wrong. When you read through the categories of misconduct listed in that report, what you're looking at is not one rogue individual or one unfortunate incident. It's a pattern. It's cultural, it's structural, and that distinction matters enormously because you cannot solve a cultural problem by writing a nicer policy document and hoping for the best. The civil servant, responding, to his credit, does not pretend none of this is serious. He agrees. There's no complacency, he says. Value for money is the heart of the job, he says. But then he starts reaching for the language that bureaucracies reach for when they are not quite ready to say something concrete, and Lowe cuts straight through it. Don't give me generalities, he says. These are actual events. What are you practically going to do? And this is where it gets genuinely interesting, because Lowe then asks a question that sounds almost comically simple, but is actually razor sharp. What does lost mean? When the report says 2/3 of these cases involved lost assets, what does lost actually mean? Did someone misplace a tank? Did a laptop wander off for a walk and never come back? Because in the real world, in any functioning business, if someone loses an asset without a very good explanation, they are held accountable. In Lowe's words, they have to pay for it. The idea that an organization of this scale, handling this volume of public money, does not operate on that same basic principle of personal accountability is, to put it mildly, a problem. But the line that really lands, the one that cuts through all the process language and the framework speak and the risk register references, is this one. In the end, you've got to send people to prison for being dishonest. Full stop. No hedging, no nuance. Because what Lowe is identifying is something that gets lost in every large institution eventually, which is that rules only work if people believe there are real consequences for breaking them. Risk registers don't deter fraud. Fear of genuine punishment does. And if the courts aren't delivering that, if the counter-fraud teams and the police aren't even talking to each other properly, then you haven't got a fraud problem, you've got a trust problem, a coordination problem, and a consequences problem, all rolled into an enormously expensive mess. The fact that this conversation is happening at all at this level of candor in a formal parliamentary setting should probably tell us how serious the situation has become, because MPs don't erupt for sport. They erupt when they've read the same report one too many times and the answers still aren't coming. So the question now isn't whether this is serious. Everyone in that room agreed it was serious. The question is what actually changes next, and whether the people responsible for changing it have the will to follow through, or whether a year from now we'll all be sitting here watching another committee, another report, and another very composed, very British eruption.